Marq de Villiers adds that unless our habits change, and unless we change our behavior, the demand for fresh water on our planet will almost certainly outstrip the supply. Marq de Villiers. Yeah, can I help you with that?
Yeah, why don't you put that back on?
Cool.
I don't mind taking my place in turn. It's all right.
Comfortable?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great.
I'm new to this thing, so I'm just warning Moses now. If he comes out too early to drag me off the stage after my 20 minutes, I might inadvertently brain him with it. For the last couple of years, I've been thinking about and wandering about in the Sahara Desert, partly because it's an intrinsically interesting place, and before my co-writer Sheila Hurdle and I were getting serious about writing about it, I didn't really have any idea, except that I knew it was the largest and most austere desert on the planet. But I had no idea how big it was. And in fact, the Sahara is larger than the continental United States. If you drove from Boston to San Diego, you still wouldn't have run out of Sahara. So, and in this huge expanse, there are a number of wonders. There are some mountains in the center, for example, the Hagar Mountains, which look like a small cluster on maps. But in fact, there are a cluster of barren peaks larger than France. There are many wonders under. There are deep wells with blind fish under the Sahara. There are huge aquifers left over from prehistoric times. There are mountains in the western desert made of emerald. There are dunes 1,500 feet high. Some of them are blood red in color. It's a most interesting place. But partly I was interested in the Sahara because of all that, and partly because a couple of years earlier I had done a book on water, and to my surprise and modest consternation, several years later I was still being invited to conferences to give a keynote speech to conferences with riveting titles like The Geological Underpinnings of the Schist Layer of the Ogallala Aquifer of High Plains, Texas. Or my favorite, The Technology of Reverse Osmosis, Desalination, an Update. Those are my favorite. So I really didn't want to become known as the water guy. So the Sahara seemed like a safe alternative. There was no conferences on hydrology in the Sahara, and water was a problem only by its rather conspicuous absence. But it turned out to be no use. Can't open a newspaper without reading about floods or droughts or contaminated aquifers or water vector diseases. So I sort of gave up and said I would come here and depress your day even further by telling you some gloomy stories. I wanted to start by telling a story which I call the parable of the dead camel. This was an incident that happened a couple of years ago. I was traveling in the Sahara with a small group of Tuareg nomads from the city of Agadez in Niger up towards Tamanrasset in Algeria, and we came to a small oasis. Nothing special about it, fairly typical Saharan oasis, a ramshackle collection of mud huts, a rather bedraggled-looking palm grove, a communal well, and a pond. When we were there, the communal well had silted up and was not working, so the village and the camel train that had preceded us, small camel caravan of maybe 50, 60 camels, were dependent entirely for their water on the pond. Well, unfortunately, there was a dead camel half in and half out of the water. It had clearly been there for quite some time because it was ripe. And the water was a kind of slimy green color with bits of camel dung floating in it. However, it was the only water in the town, so people perforce had to use it. And it was interesting to watch the reactions. The more prudent of the caravaneers dug little shallow pits outside the pond and waited for water to seep through, hoping for a filtration effect. The less prudent dipped their pails into the water on the far side of the pond from the camel. And the others just dipped their ponds and went on their way, dipped their buckets. Didn't seem to matter to them that this rotting corpse was half in and half out of the pond. So I remember asking one of the Tuareg I was traveling with. We fortunately had a four-wheel drive vehicle with plastic liter johns of water in the back. Why somebody didn't take the dead camel out of the water? Oh, they said, well, they didn't know whose camel it was. And in the Sahara, you don't mess with a man's camel, dead or alive. So I got back home and made notes about this and told people about it, and everybody was uniformly horrified at how primitive all this was. And that's, of course, where sorry to belabor the obvious, but a parable is a parable. And we, if you look around what we ourselves are doing to the planetary water system, we have a lot of dead camels of our own. A couple of small examples just to depress you even further. Of the planet's 20 major river systems, an International Rivers Network survey found 2 years ago, only 2 of them are any longer fit to drink in their natural state. We've polluted the rest. China's Yellow River, for example, the second largest and second most famous in the country, has been so overused that 3 years out of the past decade it never got to the sea at all, which was probably a big mistake on the people's part who used it, because the scientists in China, by their own admission, have found that the water of the Yellow River is now so polluted with heavy metals and other toxins that it's not safe even to use for agriculture. The Danube, to take another continent. You remember a couple of years ago there was a dam break and a mine tailing spilled into the Danube. 130,000 gallons of arsenic-laced, cyanide-laced, water got into the river, and there were a lot of moaning about how this was going to kill the Danube. Well, in point of fact, it didn't make any difference. The Danube was pretty well dead already. A Russian study has found that 80 million tons of contaminated silt pours from the Danube into the Black Sea every year. Closer to home, the St. Lawrence River, which is, of course, a lot cleaner now than it was 2 decades ago, although I don't necessarily want to drink any of it myself. But it was, you remember the story that not long ago, the beluga at the junction of the St. Lawrence and the Saguenay were so poisoned that they met the classical definition of toxic waste. So much for rivers. China, I just spent 2.5 weeks to 3 weeks in China doing some filming there, just got back a week or so ago. And the Chinese have discovered, to their own alarm, the parlous state of their own ecology. The Chinese own numbers say that up to 1/3 of the entire land mass of China, that is, bear in mind, the 3rd largest country in area in the world, up to 1/3 of the entire land mass has severe to moderate soil degradation because of water shortages. The rivers, as I said, are so polluted that last year alone, 77 red tides occurred in the China Sea, covering 1,500 square kilometers to a depth of more than 2 meters, all of them caused by runoff from agricultural and household waste. In the north of China, the Great Wall of China, that magnificent monument to human ingenuity, has basically been destroyed and overrun by sand dunes, the culprit. Too much use of water and too much irrigation. So the Chinese are finally facing up to their own problems. The fact that the floods in the Yangtze were caused not by mysterious factors, but by the fact that China was once 22% forest and is now 6% forest. The ancient city of Xi'an in the middle of the country was sited there. It was the capital through 12 or 13 Chinese dynasties. It was sited there because it was surrounded by 3 rivers. Only one of them any longer flows. And that whole province is now water stressed. And I've got some interviews with ferrymen who used to, in their own lifetimes, used to make the living taking people back and forth across the river. They're out of business now because people can walk across the river now. There is no water left. Another dead camel of some substance, waterborne diseases. When I was doing the water book 3 or 4 years ago, I came across the United Nations number that seemed to me improbable. And it was this. They said a child dies every 8 seconds somewhere on the planet from drinking contaminated water. In fact, as it turned out, this number is conservative. The real number is a child dies somewhere on this planet every 6 seconds from drinking contaminated water, somewhere around 5 million a year. In fact, in the 20 minutes that Moses has given me for this speech, 200 children are dying from drinking contaminated water. Malaria alone kills 1 million. Cholera was almost eliminated 2 or 3 decades ago. It's now spiking again. Bilharzia, schistosomiasis, there's hardly a body of water in Africa that isn't now susceptible to this parasite. Lake Malawi is said to be the only body left in Africa of water that's free of it, but I wouldn't advise you to go surfing there just yet. In some instances, particularly downstream from the High Aswan Dam in Egypt, the incidence of bilharzia has now reached 97%. This is a direct cause of human intervention in the Nile's flow. A very big dead camel indeed. In point of fact, about 1.25 billion or to 1.3 billion people, 1 out of 5 people on the planet, have no access any longer to fresh, clean water for sanitation or drinking. That is, 1.25 billion people don't have the basic amenities that the ancient Romans took for granted. Now, very often human intervention occurs for very positive and well-meaning reasons, and very often ends up making things worse. There's a famous Saharan anecdote about one Sergeant Lamy who was there pacifying the Tuareg, is the wonderful French euphemism, pacification. And in order to win over the countryside, he thought he would bring fresh water into the oases where there was just a well. He would provide more water. So he drilled wells into the aquifers, but these were aquifers under pressure. Artesian water came up, and what Sergeant Lamy started, he was unable by his own technology to stop, so the water simply kept flowing. Unfortunately, most oases in the Sahara are in depressions, and what they ended up getting was stagnant ponds of water that created a habitat for malaria mosquitoes, and suddenly there was malaria in the deep desert. And it had become a cliche among the Tuareg and the nomads and the southern Berbers that during the summer months they wouldn't allow Europeans or white people to live in the oasis towns like Murzuk and a number of the other cities in the northern Sahara. Not because they were solicitous of white people's welfare, you understand? But it was well known to those people that white people, being sort of undercooked, so to speak, and unfinished, were particularly susceptible to disease, and it was best for the health of the community to keep them out. All right, that was a colonial era, and you think, oh, well, we've learned since then, but there's a much more horrendous example, and maybe one of the biggest dead camels of all at the moment, which is the country of Bangladesh, which, as you know, is either very shallow, they have very shallow wells and is susceptible to flooding. And one of the biggest problems is that when the periodic floods came by, it would wash animal dung into the wells and contaminate them. So with very well-meaning initiatives, the donor agencies, and particularly Canada and the United States and France, poured a lot of money into drilling medium to deep level wells throughout the countryside in Bangladesh. They drilled thousands and thousands of these wells, and it cost literally millions and millions of dollars. And it succeeded. Many villages throughout the countryside were given fresh water, clean water that they never had before. Unfortunately, what they didn't realize, because not enough testing was done, is that the shale layer 50 meters down in Bangladesh has a high concentration of natural arsenic. And what you've got now is the single largest arsenic contamination ever in the planet. You have 35 million people with low or medium grade arsenic poisoning, and no way, with short of drilling the wells through and below those strata, of fixing it. It's fixable, but it will take huge, huge amounts of dollars to fix it, and nobody seems to have the political will to do so. This is one of the great underreported scandals, it seems to me, in the current ecological story. But quality of water is, alas, only one of the two water crises. The other one is the actual availability of water. There is enough water on the planet for everybody, lots of water, fresh water. We have more than enough for everybody, but unfortunately it's in the wrong places, at the wrong times, and in the wrong amounts. And we're trying desperately to re-engineer the planet to fix that problem. And as we all know, re-engineering water basins and transfer basins have its own perils. The Chinese, again, are the biggest users. The southern part of China, the Yangtze, has too much water. It's always flooding. The northern part doesn't have enough. And what the Chinese are proposing is to re-engineer the country. They want to take water from the south through 4 massive projects to take it to the north and re-irrigate the north. This will take many billions of dollars. And it might never get done. Well, desalination of seawater is everybody's favorite solution, and it has now become cheap enough that it is competitive with bulk transfers of water, which is one reason, incidentally, why this worry about Canada's exporting water is a false worry, because there is no export market. It's now already cheaper to desalinate seawater than it is to bulk transfer it. But let me leave you with one remaining scary thought. The Russians and the Canadians, scientists, have proposed mobile desalination units which they can tow to spots like the Middle East, Egypt, and other places that are short of water. These units will be powered by nuclear reactors. And if the notion of Russian vessels with Canadian nukes on them being towed to the world's trouble spots doesn't trouble you, it certainly troubles me a little, and I'm going to go home and drink a little something that's stronger than water on the strength of that. Thank you.